On this episode of FieldLink, we sit down with Austin Anderson, brand manager for the Helena Products Group, and James DeMoss, Helena Product Specialist, as we talk about Zalo, a unique herbicide for glufosinate-tolerant soybeans, cotton, and canola. We'll learn how this product could potentially be a solution for your post-application needs this season. Plus, Jody Lawrence joins us from Nashville to discuss the trade markets across the United States. We've got a lot happening in the soybean market as well as the cattle market. Stay tuned for this episode of FieldLink. And welcome back to FieldLink. On this podcast, we're going to talk about a new herbicide that's on the market that's really catching some attention for those growers that's particularly are utilizing the glufosinate trait. Joining me in this podcast is Austin Anderson, brand manager for Helena Products Group, and James DeMoss, who's a product specialist for Helena, based in the South. Guys, welcome to FieldLink.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for having us.
Guys, it's really exciting. We're introducing today a pretty new product to a lot of producers out there. There's probably a lot of questions. We've had some things coming out in the media on this product, but it's called Zalo. Austin, talk to us a little bit about Zalo. Where does Zalo fit, and what are some of the major benefits?
So just to kind of get into it from the standpoint of, what makes up Zalo. So Zalo is a combination of glufosinate and quizalofop, or like Liberty and Assure 2. So really, from the standpoint on what the value of Zalo is allows us to be able to mix some of the common tank mix partners that people may or may not be using with their Liberty or with their glufosinate formulations that they have out there, just to be able to bring a one tank solution for somebody to be able to control both broadleaf and grass weeds and a variety of glufosinate tolerant crops like cotton, soybeans, and canola.
Wow. So those growers out there that have glufosinate tolerant products like soybeans, cotton, and canola, pretty good little product. It takes the mystery out of tank mixes of things.
Well, absolutely. It just makes, to where you don't have to have a chemistry set on your turn row. But, when we think about applications of glufosinate and what the glaring gap is for those is sometimes like the grass control that people may or may not get with their glufosinate application. So this allows us to be able to really round out that solution for growers that, are really looking to be able to utilize glufosinate, but also be able to try to control grasses more consistently. So with that Assure 2 plus that glufosinate, it allows us to be able to really put in a good solution for growers that have some issues around what their current products that they're using are now.
We talked about making things simpler, and it is simple. Utilizing Zalo is really an easy button, if you will, if you want to utilize this type of technology. But it brings more than just simplicity. It adds a formulation technology that's pretty darn unique in the industry.
Oh, absolutely. So when you look at the glufosinate market as a whole, for the most part, it's single modes of action, single products, and this ProLease formulation technology not only allows us to be able to make sure that these two active ingredients stay in solution and don't separate, but also make sure that they're delivered on target for those weeds to be able to take them up efficiently and effectively as well.
Definitely a unique formulation technology, and that's something that's often overlooked by a lot of producers, not knowing, the mystery of it, but that's really the secret sauce, isn't it, Austin?
Yeah, there's one thing to be said for just mixing different active ingredients on the turn row and just knowing that one may be more oil soluble or more oil loving, and then the other one may be more water soluble. And, as we know from elementary school chemistry or middle school chemistry, is oil and water don't mix.
Right.
And so allowing us to be able to provide this formulation technology in a premix where not only is it unique to have multiple modes of action in the same tank as glufosinate, but from the standpoint on being able to provide consistent performance across the field and not seeing that separation or that AI degradation, being able to really deliver top-end performance.
Yeah, it certainly eliminates or reduces the risk of different tank mixes by utilizing this formulation technology that is ProLease inside of Zalo. Okay, let's pull in James DeMoss here. James, you've got a lot of producers in your market. You're covering Louisiana, over Mississippi, all the way to Texas, Oklahoma, as well as Arkansas and beyond. You've got a lot of growers out there that are utilizing glufosinate-tolerant types of crops, such as soybeans and cotton, specifically in your geography. How's Zalo going to impact their farming operation this year?
Well, the great thing about Zalo is it is a combination of two different chemistries. And look, glufosinate has always been excellent on weeds and vines, and that's always been a great thing. But over the years, we started seeing different products like glyphosate slip, and that's where the quasiflop is going to come in. That Assure 2 is going to come in there and help pick up those grasses because at the end of the day, the glufosinate, it was a little weak on grass. It spotted up. You always had to mix something with it. And we've talked about the ProLease technology, and that's something that's really very innovative because it takes something that takes a slow kill and a hot kill, and it really combines them and makes them work in harmony. When you put these two together, you going to have the quick piece on the weeds from the glufosinate, but it's also going to allow that Assure 2 to do its thing as well. The other great thing that I like about this is the industry has been so much on a dim. This is a fop. It is a cousin, but it's something different. And where we've had grasses that where the dims weren't controlling, we're bringing out an old school chemistry that hasn't been used in forever, and we're able to pick up these grasses again. So we're able to go out there and not only pick up all of our weeds and vine species, but now we're able to pick up our grasses all in one mix. And the other thing is, if somebody tries to mix this on the turn row, let them try. It's going to be very sketchy, very skeptical, very inaccurate quality of performance when they do that. That's where that ProLease technology comes in and just blows everybody out of the water with this piece.
The ProRelease technology, that formulation technology, James, feels like that's the confidence piece. That's the confidence the growers can have in that application.
Oh, absolutely. Because when I first heard about this, I'm like, how is this going to work together? And then once we heard about the ProLease technology and they talked about it, then it's like, okay, that let me sleep at night, knowing that I can make this recommendation to a grower. And we have put it out there. And when people put it out there, they're sending you pictures of this. Like, look at this. Look how well this worked. It just turns the entire field brown with one product.
Austin, are there some timings when you recommend utilizing Zalo, maybe some specific situations?
Well, I mean, a lot of the target is, that mid-post application, whether you're talking about soybeans or corn or other opportunities there. But, it's really a post application, as the season goes on these glufosinate tolerant crops, just gives us an additional tool to be able to control those weeds at that time.
James, how are growers or your sales force? How are you guys positioning Zalo in your market?
So, as you well know, we have dicamba back on the market this year. We have 2,4-D, Enlist technology, and XtendFlex technology now. And every now and then you'll find an area where everybody's going one or the other. But here's the thing that we're kind of positioning with is where we have both dicamba and 2,4-D in the area, we can go in there with this product here and do just as good a job and not only take out the weeds and the vines, but we're also picking up the grass because at the end of the day, we're having to mix a glyphosate with the other two products. And let's face it, this day and time, glyphosate's not what it used to be. So not only are we gaining a weed control advantage and an easeability advantage, but we're not worried about drift with this. Well, we got these people worried about where the cotton or the beans is going to get a dicamba or a 2,4-D drift. This takes all out of play. It doesn't volatilize like the other products, so it's a lot safer product, and it's a lot easier to manage and handle.
Managing and handling, I think that's really important as we look into Plant 26 for sure. A lot of noise around drift, and this might be a product that could help reduce some of that.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody needs to take a look at it because at the end of the day, in the South, vines is coming back a little bit, but pigweeds or weeds are our biggest species. And then we're constantly hearing about, well, I'm getting poor grass control. And what can we do? People were putting out high rates of glufosinate and get mediocre grass control. Due to ProLease technology, we have an old school grammaticide that we're mixing with a very hot herbicide, and we're getting some seriously good performance out there that's leaving the fields clean with a one-pass stripped application.
James, I think that's what's neat about Zalo is they're proven technologies, these proven herbicides. But with the formulation technology, we just make it simpler, don't we?
We make it simpler and we make it easier. And at the end of the day, the key thing is we make it better.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's talk about better. How can we make Zalo better by picking the right adjuvant, Austin?
Well, we always think about, what does each product or each individual active ingredient need for maximum performance. And we know that glufosinate in times, depending on your weather and the growing conditions, can sometimes make it or break it by the right adjuvant. So, making sure that we've got a product like Interactive, a product like Quest or Request Plus Dynamic for that kind of guy that really wants to be able to plug and play exactly what they need. And then we also have a new product that we released a couple years ago in Cohort, just depending on exactly what you're looking for, whether you're trying to meet those AMS requirements or whether you're trying to really focus on your absorption, penetration, and spreading of this technology. One thing that we know is whenever you think about Liberty in the past, 40% of the formulation has been surfactant. And so when you start adding things like Quizalofop and ProLease formulation technology, that's where adjuvants really have a chance to shine and be able to make up for the gap of some of that inert package that really goes in there to be able to make these products shine. But from the standpoint on really what we recommend, we suggest that anybody go to their local Helena location and they're up to date on not only Zalo, but the right adjuvants for the right areas. So depending on what area that you're in and the experience that people have with glufosinate and Assure 2, just really depends on which adjuvant of choice that, our guys will recommend. But they're all good choices. They really all get the job done and really be able to be that good tank mix partner for anybody.
The real key is if you're using Zalo, be sure you talk to your Helena rep and get the right adjuvant for your farm, your field, your acre, depending upon where you live for sure. Guys, we've talked a lot about cotton. We've talked about soybeans, glufosinate. We touched briefly on canola. This could be a pretty big deal for those growers up in the Northwest that are raising canola.
So, we know that there's a lot of these group ones that are already being used like Quizalofop or Assure 2 and also glufosinate in the traded systems that people have. So this just really is able to really provide a really good solution all in one tank at the right rates to be able to deliver the performance that you're looking for in that crop.
Yeah, definitely. It's fun to have a product that's going to have some of that crop diversity and spectrum that's going to reach a lot of different parts of the country for sure. James, earlier on, we were talking before the podcast started. We talked about, the planting cycle, and one thing that we don't like to plant on, but we'd like to plant for, is replant. A product like Zalo could be a pretty darn good tool for those growers that are maybe forced to do a little bit of replanting, wouldn't it be?
Absolutely. I had this conversation earlier today, got a phone call. The corn, we had a freeze. The guy thought it was going to make it. It didn't make it. It was V6 corn. It was 8 or 9 inches tall. He also had some broadleaves in the field, and he was looking for this corn. And the grower and the sales rep was just trying to look for a solution. I'm like, guys, we have the perfect solution right here. I said, what about Zalo? Because whatever vines and little weeds that are popping up, I said, we can nuke them with that. And I said, at the end of the day, you can take a low dose rate of a gramaticide and wipe out corn. But since you're going to beans, let's put the full rate. Let's start the slate clean like we need to be. If that slate is clean to give our crops the maximum opportunity, we can knock out volunteer corn. The other side of it is, even in the rice industry, we've used it in burn down. So it's just not an in-crop system. We can also use this before crop for burn down opportunity. And people are just amazed. There's some difficult grasses that are slipping through this day and time, even in the rice industry, and it works wonders. I mean, it just leaves the field clean. And the thing, we talked about the correct adjuvant, and what most people don't ever talk about with gramaticides, whether DIMs or FOPs, one of the things that they really respond to is AMS replacement. Whether we're using Cohort, Quest, or Interactive, it's required on the glufosinate, but it just turns that grammaticide into another next level beast. So we got the right products and the right sources to put out there, but it has a dynamic range. We don't have to just use it in crop. Well, we can also use it in a pre-plant. We don't have a maximum poundage label rate use like on the dicamba. We're only allowed a half a pound a year now. If you're trying to save that, burn your corn down with this. Use this for burn down. It's picking up pretty much everything you got in the field anyway.
Yeah. Austin, there's just a lot of flexibility with this product, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. And, you talk about flexibility, and DeMoss highlighted it a little bit earlier around, dicamba being back, right? And, the beauty of having technology and then having it taken away and then having it back is people learn to kill weeds with glufosinate. It was a big year last year. And really, from the standpoint on if a grower's looking to alleviate some of the restrictions or not sure about the restrictions or, trying to figure out what to do and, all that sort of stuff, Zalo is a really simple fit. It's a good solution for post applications where you would typically use some of those dicamba applications if you don't want to. And there's a lot of unknowns going on this day and age with commodity prices and fertilizer prices and seed prices and everything else that's going on.
Government regulations, things changing all the time.
Yeah, just being consistent. Knowing that we can kill weeds dead with Zalo is something that helps me sleep at night. And knowing that growers have options, whether they feel comfortable with the regulations or don't feel comfortable, they can use the technology or they can use something different like Zalo and allow us to be able to really show that differentiated performance with that unique premix with the formulation technology and the adjuvants and all the things that go along with it. They really allow us to be able to put a great solution in front of growers to know that, yes, this product is new. You may have never used it before, but you can still use it with confidence.
And it's a lot of the base molecules that most growers are pretty familiar with.
Yep.
Austin, any last comments around Zalo as growers get ready to hit the fields in Plant 26?
Oh, man, we're raring to go around here. There's seed going in the ground all over the place around the South. And, as we're preparing our spray programs, Zalo is a good flexible option. Like DeMoss highlighted earlier, burn down is a great option. Post-applied is a great option. It really just gives us an opportunity to, first and foremost, start clean to stay clean, to where we can manage not only expenses, but also make sure that we're staying on plan, staying on task, staying on budget to allow growers to be able to make more.
James, any last minute thoughts as we wrap up this podcast on Zalo?
Yeah, I think we covered it very well, that it's very flexible, very user-friendly, very easy to use. And I'm big on our formulation technologies, and ProLease is a brand new one. It is something that we just discovered, something very new. And at the end of the day, you will start seeing more and more ProLease for formulation technologies used in the marketplace. This is just the beginning. We have a whole opportunity because this is able to take two chemistries that don't like each other, don't work with each other, and truly work in harmony. So this is just really the tip of the iceberg on what you'll start seeing from Helena Chemical or Helena Agri-Industries as far as ProLease technology.
Yeah, we're really excited about ProLease. And as you said, this is the first step, and there's a whole pipeline behind it. Guys, I want to thank you both, Austin Anderson, brand manager for Helena Products Group, and James DeMoss from our product specialist group out of Helena. Thank you for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink. And welcome back to FieldLink. Joining us from Nashville is Jody Lawrence. Jody, welcome back to FieldLink.
Bill, it's good to be back as we start winding down the last few days of April. Hard to believe that we're just a few days away from being a third of the way through 2026. It's every year seems to go faster.
It sure does, and it's crazy. May is around the corner. It's almost here. Derby Day, Jody, is coming up this weekend. You got your bets in?
Yes, my sister-in-law is in the horse business, and she is a pretty good handicapper. So at the risk of breaking probably every type of law for the FCC, I will not give any of those picks in today's podcast.
Jody, I tell you, these markets, it feels like we're all handicappers right now. We've got a lot happening in the marketplace. My gosh, we got stories popping up left and right as we start to look at. We had a shipment turned around from Argentina today from the Norwegians. We're taking in some beans, and they put a halt to that. Jody, fill us in on that one. How did that one event impact the soybean market?
Well, it's really strange because, and what I wrote about in today's comment, right when we're sure we know what is going to move the markets, we boil it down to a handful of the important factors. We always end up with some lightning out of a blue clear sky. And that was one today because the Netherlands turned away 3 shipments of bean meal from Argentina. There is a gene that was in the bean meal. It's a HB4, and I did a little digging, and it was incorporated into the soybean seed, 10 years ago maybe, from the sunflower plant to add more drought tolerance, because sunflowers apparently are very drought tolerant. So, and what's interesting and why I'm a little surprised that it may have had such a big effect, beans were at one point up 16 cents today in July, was that same gene is approved for import from South America, whether it's in meal or beans, for the U.S. and for China. So those beans were those cargoes of bean meal were turned away and immediately rerouted to Southeast Asia. So it's it was a surprise, but I'm not sure it's quite as bullish as everybody wanted to make it today. Certainly, the fact that we seem to be at an impasse with Iran reopening the straits, and you had crude oil climb back over $97 today on the West Texas. There are a lot of kind of legs of support. You've got a general inflation trade concern where you have a lot of investors and big funds coming in and buying raw materials as a hedge against that. Cotton is a perfect example because you have cotton December this year over 81 cents a pound. And that really, when we were trading mid to high 60s earlier in the year, 81-cent cotton did not seem like it would be something attainable without either sharply lower acres or a weather problem later in the year. So the general inflation trade, largely driven by crude oil and crude oil going higher, and the ripple effects that has through all the transportation and logistics part of it. All of our markets are certainly seeing the benefit of that, but they have to, because we've got to offset higher fertilizer prices, likely lower basis levels, because the cost of transportation from the elevators, whether it is on boat or on rail or on truck, is going to be higher. So there are a lot of things you have to figure into this that hopefully we're coming out a little bit ahead of it, but more than likely we're just kind of pushing around money right now. So the inflation trade is a real thing. We'll just have to see how it ends.
Boy, Jody, it just seems like, as we continue to have these conversations, there's just not a lot of normalcy in the marketplace. And as you pointed out, we get these little blips, just like the Norwegian piece here. And of course, the oil piece with the straits, and how that's really creating that bullish effect for products like cotton, because it's impacting other synthetics likely down the chain and creating opportunities. And when those opportunities come, we need to be ready to take action as growers, don't we?
Yeah, and the hard part is you can't wait until you know everything to set sales targets and make sales, because I know everyone is extremely nervous about, I don't know if I can sell it here.
Right.
Because of what could happen later in the year. How high could diesel prices go? If I want to do some fall application or some side dressing during the summer, what's the price of fertilizer going to be? So it's definitely a challenge. And because what's interesting, you look at it, and today, I don't think we got to $5 on December 27 corn, but we certainly are flirting with it. And at today's high was $4.98. It's the highest it's been in a while.
Sure.
Over the last 3 years, $5 futures would have driven a lot of people to pick up the phone to do it. But with the situation so unknown for next year about cost, especially input costs, $5 might be a fantastic price, or it might be a price that even at $5 doesn't get all the ends met.
Certainly moving in the right direction, but to your point, some inputs, we just still kind of scratch our heads a little bit. On the fertilizer side, certainly the administration is taking a lot of, that seems to be, Jody, Brooke Rollins and, the entire administration really going after the fertilizer side, having lots of questions.
Yeah, they're doing their best to, I don't know how much you can pressure the major
Right.
fertilizer producers, the CFs of the world, the Mosaics, and you can go through the whole list of them. But one thing I did see today was that India's government approved their annual fertilizer subsidy for their farmers, and raised it 20%. So they are already addressing the fact on the front end of the higher cost for this year's growing season, where historically what the U.S. has done is waited till the back end. So two different ways to deal with it. Which one's right, which one's wrong, not really sure.
Yeah.
But we certainly have government intervention all across, or involvement all across the world, to address this. And really, I think the easiest way, rather than paying more money out to get all this done, is let's find a way to pressure and just get the straits reopened and let it sort itself back out. But that's not the route people are choosing to take right now.
Yep. A lot. That knife cuts pretty deep, because yes, the straits are certainly an impact, but boy, there's a lot of capital investment involved by a lot of those big organizations in terms of moving fertilizer, and it takes a lot of capital and a long-term commitment. And frankly, there's just been a lot of instability here in the world here the last handful of years, and we'll keep battling away. Okay, Jody, let's talk a little bit about the weather. What's the impact of planting progress? What are you seeing out there right now?
Well, what we're seeing in the U.S. is that we are getting too much cool, wet conditions, too many cool, wet conditions over a large enough part of the Corn Belt. And certainly, if you look at it, it's really, really wet from Missouri all the way across in kind of a swath up to northern Illinois. That what I'm curious to see when the planting progress comes out today, when you start digging into it, is where are the areas that are really, really slow and behind? Because we know we have a lot of areas that are ahead and moving very quickly. Those, from what we have seen, are south of the Ohio River, because while the Midwest and certainly the northern Corn Belt are too wet and too cool, you have the Delta and all of the Southeast too hot and too dry. So you've got a balance that you have to do. And really part of the balance when you start figuring into yield is, yes, they'll take the moisture, especially a lot of the Western Corn Belt that was way behind. I've talked to several people over the weekend from eastern Nebraska who are happy with the rain, but they would like to see it warm up to get soil temperature up, to have what they've already planted start emerging a little quicker. But if you start having the problems in the big production counties, in the big production regions, certainly you talk about Iowa, Illinois, the big I states, that if they end up wet and kind of past those mid-May dates where that ideal early yield bump planting tends to be thought of, that's what we're going to have to address, because we certainly don't want to minimize anybody that's growing corn, but there are counties and there are areas in the country that do have a more dramatic impact than others.
Yeah, definitely. And certainly wet and moist up in the northern part there of the Corn Belt, as you mentioned. But boy, when we start heading south and southwest into the wheat country of Oklahoma, western Kansas, Nebraska, the panhandle of Texas, it's dry. It's real dry. And certainly impact wheat a little bit.
Yeah, the southern plains, and really if you just take the plain states in general, where the hard winter wheat crop is we're expecting those conditions to fall even further in today's report because it's dry, it's cool. They went through some freeze stress about a month ago. And just with the terrible stands and the lack of moisture, you've got a lot of haves and have not areas when you start saying some areas are just too wet that are major production areas. And then you have areas like that. And you look at wheat, it was up another 14 today. And some of wheat strength certainly is based on the U.S. crop conditions, and some of it is that you do have shipment disruption coming out of the Middle East. But you look, I'm looking at today's chart, and today is the highest close that we have had this year in July wheat. And, going back to all the way back to last summer. So you're at about a 1-year high in wheat, and we know what's driving it. And this is an area where we would also like to see some sales. But I've talked to a lot of growers that just are not comfortable because they don't know whether they're going to have 20, 40, 60, or 80 bushel wheat coming out later this year.
Yep. The next several weeks are going to be really, really important. Hopefully we can get some rains out that area of the country and really bring that wheat crop along. All right, Jody, the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, was scheduled this week to be in Arizona. She didn't make it. She was going to go down there and talk about cattle, starting to open up the doors to bring some feeders in from Arizona into the United States. But boy, the brakes have been pumped. They're just not ready, are they?
They're just not ready because when she was in Texas, I guess it was now 10 days ago, they were expecting some update, the cattlemen that she was speaking to there, about potentially reopening, or at least a timeline to reopen the Mexican border. But a lot of her speech had more to do with the fact that they had found multiple new cases of screwworm within a couple hundred miles of the border. So I think they're just stuck. And in a lot of ways, we have some major issues that we aren't seeing any progress on, positively or negatively. And like the straits, the longer they stay closed, the more bullish support that's going to offer for everything. We talked about the raw material inflation trade. You look at how long the Mexican border stays closed because, the break that we saw in cattle, almost $17, we've gotten back 12 of that already in just about 5 trading sessions. So you've got a lot of people very sensitive, and this has just exacerbated the volatility by the fact that these funds use algorithms and AI. If they see a headline that says border reopen, they're just going to hammer the cattle market. On the other side of it, if they see new case of screwworm, you're going to have a big day like you did today of, where cattle are up $3, $4, $5.
Definitely. If you're in the cattle business, boy, be paying attention to what's going on there. There's a lot of movement happening right now. And that the screwworm is really impacting, some of those decisions for producers. Jody, want to thank you for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink as we continue to have a whole lot going on in the marketplace. And like we said, it's Derby week, and feels like we got a lot of gambling going on right now in this marketplace. So anyhow, good luck with your wagers, and thanks for joining us on this episode.
All right, Bill, thank you. And everybody that's in the field, please be safe. And any questions, just let us, give us a call or email Brady or me, and we'll be happy to talk through what you're thinking about.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of FieldLink. If you have questions about Zalo, be sure to reach out to your Helena representative to learn more about this unique chemistry.